Welcome to M&A Science Live, where leading M&A practitioners share lessons learned from their experience. When you use proven techniques in M&A, more value is created. If you're interested in keeping up with the latest from M&A Science, visit mascience.com and subscribe to our newsletter. Again, that's mascience.com. I'm your host, Kisan Patel, CEO and founder of M&A Science and Deal Room. Joining me today is Peter Linas, CPO and EVP of Corporate Development at Bullhorn. Today, we're going to talk about how corporate development teams function in an infrequent acquisition environment and how to manage that atmosphere. Peter, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you very much. We've got the good weather, I think, is behind us. We've had our summer. We've now got a typical British cloudy summer, but good. Yeah, looking forward to our chat and looking forward to sharing some of our learnings.
Great. Can we kick things off by telling us a little bit about your M&A background?
Yeah, of course. My M&A background really started 5 or 6 years ago. I won't give you my complete background, but I started off life as a stockbroker. So I had a insight into the world of finances and how things work. 5 or 6 years ago, the business that I was still working for a company called Bullhorn. I've been here now 13 years. We were, in conjunction with our parent company, buying a business in the Netherlands. And because at the time I headed up the international business, I got involved in that and quite deeply involved in that acquisition. The acquisition went well. And at the end of that time, my CEO said to me, he said, that was good. Enjoyed working with you on that. And you've clearly got some talents in that direction. We're about to go on a more dynamic M&A spree, let's say. How would you feel about taking on that M&A duties a little more robustly and be responsible for Corp Dev M&A? And I gladly accepted that. That was 5-6 years ago. We've made 7 or 8 acquisitions over that time. Hence, they are sort of regular but infrequent. And we've worked out what I think is a really good cadence on how we've been through that time, through periods of peak activity. The second deal we did was a bit of a baptism of fire for me. We did a threefer where we bought sort of 3 companies simultaneously. I've learned a lot over that time, and particularly on how to keep fixed costs relatively low, but still be able to scale and deal with whatever opportunities come our way.
It's a learning curve. You keep learning as you do these deals.
Hey, you never feel that no buyer is ever the same. And no market conditions are ever the same. Big challenge at the moment over insurance. To try and get R&W insurance is tough. The insurance companies are busy and used to expect quotes to be turned around in real time. Now, it's a buyer's market from their perspective, and they are not delivering to the same timelines as they have done previously, which also sort of causes a deal cramp at the end, whereby you could expect to get the insurance quotes through. Now it's sort of an undefined because they are busy and they're getting around to it as quick as they can. But it's causing uncertainty over timing of deals. A lot harder to predict end of deals at this point in time, for that being the main factor.
Yeah, there's a lot of changes in the market right now.
Yeah.
Since your company's doing infrequent acquisitions, how do you manage your corp dev team?
Small is beautiful, I think. Is that what they say? We have myself, who heads up Corp Dev. We scaled the team back in the pandemic to really myself and Ben, who works Corp Dev with me. Corp Dev is not my exclusive role. It's a major part of what I do, but I have other activities within the business. So there's 2 of us who keep the lights on, let's say, in terms of market activity, in terms of market research, in terms of potential opportunity outreach. And then we scale up. If a deal comes into sight and then we get a deal, and sort of when we're getting serious about a deal, pre-LOI, we'll then start to pick the team that's going to take that deal forwards. We're lucky. We've got a great legal team. I've got a very my accomplice in crime is our CFO, Brian. We work very closely together. So we use the resources of legal, we use the resources of finance, and we scale up pretty quickly in terms of, say, building that assault team, somebody who can get the deal done within a relatively short space of time. And then other assets, which I'm sure we'll talk more about, integration, and who's actually leading the project. We can take people out of the business on secondment to lead and to assist on making deals actually happen. You know as well as I do, you've got the two sides of the deal. You've got the LOI and then go through, get to sign and close. But that's really, everyone thinks that's M&A. You bought the business, fantastic, well done. But that's where the work starts, and that's where your ROI comes, because unless you're in a position where you know what's happening day one, you have a firm plan on how you're going to integrate that business or not, you might leave that business standalone, really determines the success of the deal. So it's important that whoever is thinking about M&A is not just about a bright, shiny light, shiny object in the distance, which you can say we can buy that, but you've got a lot of time and effort and money that goes into these deals, and you've got to be ensure you're delivering an accretive deal over the term that you define, whether that's 1 year or 5 years. That comes down to your modeling and your M&A modeling and how you want to make that work.
So core team, very lean, just 2 people?
2 people in the core team, yes.
And then as you pursue these deals, it sounds like you're pulling people in from various departments and parts of the company.
Yeah, I mean, so some people, finance know what they're responsible for, and we'll lead that side. Legal know what they're responsible for. I think the key person in any deal is who is doing the planning. Obviously, I'm intimate with that, and Ben that works alongside me. But to bring in a true integration lead that completely understands the business. So this is really a hybrid role. This is not somebody who has got huge amounts of integration planning experience in businesses. It's about somebody who knows your business intimately and can deal cross-functionally in order to make the efficiencies that need to be made and ensure success. So that's sort of the key person in the deal, because that's not just in the lead up to sign and close, but that's in the first 90 days, 180 days are then critical to making that successful. So we normally cherry pick someone out of the business that has particular talents and will be particularly good on the deal that we're looking at.
Got it. Well, let's back up to the very beginning and the early stages of a deal timeline and think through first specifically how you're managing people efficiently. What does that look like from the early stages of just sourcing deals?
In terms of sourcing, we know what we want to buy in terms of it's no deals have been brought to us via third parties. We sort of laid our market out and laid our targets out, and there's about 200, 250 companies that we have relationships with that we track over time, which is relatively simple to do with 1.5 people in terms of keeping in touch with those businesses. Keeping in touch with scale is always something that's important, and they've got to be in their cycle and they've got to be ready to sell. There's no point in trying to buy a company that actively doesn't want to sell. The only way you're going to do that is to pay hugely over the odds to get their attention, and that's never guaranteed. So so much of M&A, it's a lot more human than people think, and a lot of it is about relationships, and certainly making deals successful. To have relationships with the founders, stroke the key people in the private equity house you might be buying from, is really key, because deals get sticky. We know deals get sticky, and there's always moments in a deal which can blow up. And sometimes it's that core relationship and that trust that you build. And you've got to build trust in it, your micro amounts of time, because there is so much mistrust that goes on in corp dev. You're buying a business. Where's the catch? What are they trying to achieve? So from that perspective, keeping busy through the quiet times. If you've got target lists, that enables you to do that. And any business out there, even if they're only part-time corp dev, and I would call those part-time. We've mentioned in the past, you've mentioned, a business this year that's making 100 acquisitions, way out of our league. We look at making 1, 2, maybe 3 acquisitions on an annual basis. That's not because we can't make more, and that we would scale up if it was accretive and we could do so. It's just within our segment, there's not thousands of targets. We're looking at a relatively small number of targets that we track and keep in touch with. And obviously everything that we do, has to be accretive. We're not looking over the 10-year term. We're sort of looking in a 3 to 5 year period as to it's got to be accretive. And we buy businesses, from their accretive nature. Some businesses we buy from a strategic technology nature. We're taking on board technology that we know we want to hit that space in terms of adjacencies from ourselves, that we can then grow that, bring that into the business and sell that product through our own business.
Got it. So just the fact that your target list is not massive, 200 companies, that you could cover that pretty efficiently with 1.5 resources.
Absolutely.
And it sounds like there's a good amount of time frame just to nurture those relationships till they're actually at a point where they're willing to transact at something that would make sense for both parties.
Absolutely, you nailed it. That's sort of where we are. And there's obviously in that tracker list, we've got primary, secondary, and tertiary targets. And we know the level of attractiveness of those businesses, and sometimes it's waiting for those businesses to reach a scale that hits their financial dynamics, or we're willing to pay slightly ahead of the curve. Historically, we used to be on sort of historic 12 months revenue, LTM, but now every business they want to sell on forward versus looking back. And obviously, every company we buy has got amazing strategic initiatives where the numbers haven't hit the P&L yet, but they're going to, and the companies want rewarding for that future short-term growth, which they consider is in the bag. And again, I think that's become a new nature and a new nuance to the market.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very different way of looking at deals. What happens when you? Pardon me?
Sorry, no, go on.
Oh, what happens when you do get to that point and you identify a target, you get to some agreed upon terms? What does that look like as you move through a diligence process, and how you're managing people from there?
So it will depend on how busy we are. In the new world, the post-COVID world, we've trimmed down the team. Historically, we've always used an advisor, a merchant bank. We use DCP out of Washington, DC. We have, through COVID, done a couple of smaller deals on our own without their input, because we've learned over the last few years we know enough to be dangerous on how to get a deal done. But we've always got them to bring in to run the process for us. We don't involve third parties in day one planning, and in those 90 days or the initial launch period, but they can be very helpful managing through diligence, and having a third party involved can often be a great way and a subtle way of negotiating, particularly when people are getting caught up on certain aspects of the deal, whether that be various numbers that come with the deal, net working capital calculations. Somebody who has been through that many times can help the other side, i.e. the side that we're buying, negotiate that. So we've got 2 ways to go forward. We can build our team, which case myself and Ben, we would take that on board. We'd bring in the assets we need, and we would make the deal happen. If it's a larger deal, or if we have multiple deals in flight at the same time, we'd always bring in DCP or somebody like DCP as our advisors, who can help us steer us through that and keep the trains running on time. Because so much about making a deal successful is keeping those trains running on time. hitting the deadlines and driving for a close date. Might always have to be flexibility around when the nuance of that close date is, but it's about driving for the day because deal fatigue is real. And if you don't put the right level of resources on there, if you let certain conversations drift on certain micro negotiations, because the deal is just one big negotiation. Again, people think you do the LOI, you've got the headline terms, that's the end of negotiation. But the SPA brings out so many micro negotiations on what happens next. And there's a lot of moving parts. So it's not something you can under-resource. I've talked about being cost conscious, but I would never recommend anyone under-resources a project, because if they under-resource it, you've got a huge capacity for things for the wheels to fall off and things to go wrong. And when things go wrong in deals, it's hard to win your way back.
How do you determine whether you're going to staff up internally versus use external resources?
As I said, historically, we always used external resources. There was an opportunity, a company we bought last year. Was it last year? Back end of 19, no, year before last. And it was a relatively small business. It was a known asset where we had a relationship with the individuals, and we decided it wasn't worth investing in outside resources in order to help us get it over the line. We did that very well. But really, it's scale. Scale of how much work we've got going on in terms of what our capacity levels are, and scale in terms of the business we're buying. If it's a large deal over a certain value, it's something we're definitely bringing the third party to work our way through that. And I equally think if you're buying a deal from a founder, buying a business from a founder, very different dynamics to buying a business from a private equity or a VC house, because the levels of competency and the levels tend to go a lot deeper when you're buying something from a professional institution who's selling an asset, and tends to be slightly more complex.
Tell me more.
If someone's if somebody's a founder of a business, they will hopefully have advisors. Please let them have advisors, because if they don't, it's again very challenging, because they think they're buying a house, and they apply the same techniques, and they think, well, I've done deals before. I know how to buy things. I bought houses. I bought cars. It's the same. I'm now selling my business. I've sold a house. And it's complicated, and there's a lot to be aware of. So I always like private vendors, founder-led businesses, to have advisors, good experience. The most challenging deals of all are founders' first-time exits, because there's certain stuff that is counterintuitive within the M&A process, and there's certain things that are uncomfortable. When you're talking about, whether it's indemnities, warranties, escrows, there's a lot to learn in a very short space of time. So if a founder goes into a deal without advisors, the sort of alarm bells already start to ring. And we try to get certain things within the LOI, whereby even down a simple example in the LOI would be the founder's non-compete. There's no point in leaving the non-compete until 8 weeks, 11 weeks, 12 weeks into the process, when you're starting to look at sign and close, because their expectation might be, we can sell the business and I'll just spin up again tomorrow. And when you tell them that, you want a reasonable length of time for their non-compete, that can sometimes cause real deal friction at the wrong time in the deal. So there's certain things traditionally, and I say, I've not got the corp dev background, but there's certain things akin to that which I'll bring right forward into the LOI process, and get that into the LOI, because then you've done it early, and a buyer will listen to you a lot more keenly when you're talking price initially than they will at the back end of the deal when they think it's nearly done, and they're sort of used to negotiating, and they're sort of used to how an SPA falls together, and they've got everything, and they're used to that more conflictual environment that comes around in that process. So if it's really important, get it locked down in the LOI, because it will save you a lot of trials and tribulations further on in the process.
When you hire advisors, What areas of the deal? Because you can obviously hire advisors for far above and beyond anything you need to do. What are the key areas that you hire retain advisors for?
We retain advisors. So we may have an overreaching advisor that will have great experience of, we're a technology business, and we buy technology companies. And that's different to buying someone in manufacturing, food processing, whatever it might be. So it's important, whoever advisors you get, you've got the people who know your market. And in technology, they understand recurring revenues and they know what the difference between a recurring revenue and a reoccurring revenue was, because those have big impact on valuations and what people are willing to pay. We will always bring in a tax advisor. We'll always get legal diligence from a tech perspective. We'll always check the open source technology to check they're not using anything they shouldn't be, anything they shouldn't be paying for. But those are the main areas. It really comes down to tax advice and legal diligence. We obviously have our own firm of lawyers that we use. We've done several deals with now. They know us. And again, that helps. If you're doing a one-off deal and it's a sole one-off deal and you're never going to be buying again, you sort of want to get the right team for one deal. But our strategy for the last 5 or 6 years has always been to have an ongoing corp dev. So any partners we bring in, we try and continue to work with, because by the time they get around to the second deal, the third deal, they know where our hotspots are. They know what is important to us, and it makes for far less friction in the deal cycle.
You're still doing a good amount of this stuff in-house, it sounds like.
Yeah, we still do a lot in-house. And we bring in an advisor, boutique investment bank to help us through the process. We'll bring in external parties, but everything else we do ourselves.
When you bring a boutique bank, I mean, you're bringing them in, are you compensating with like deal fees like you do typically a banker, or is it?
Yeah, okay. Deal fees.
Got it. What does it look like to scale up your corp dev team up and down as you sort of do these deals?
I think the key to that is what you just spoke about is the investment bank, the advisors, providing they can scale. You know, whether we're doing one deal or 5 deals, have they got the capacity to run those deals for us? And when I talk about running the deals, again, to be clear, this is really from LOI through to close and the sweep up after that. This is not about the integration. We've had to hold back in the past because we had a period where we were very active and we bought 4 businesses within a relatively short space of time. And we actually had to take our foot off the gas because we're a great believer in day one integrations. The business is integrated literally in real time. The day we buy the business, we meet the people and we integrate them into the teams. Our heat from the organization and the capacity of the organization was at a limit whereby we didn't want to break the business by being too aggressive from an M&A perspective. So at times we've had to sort of stage our deals. We've had to pace ourselves so we didn't blow up in the process of buying too many businesses. Because there's a lot of, if you're buying a business which is a run in terms of how much work needs to be done from an integration perspective, you've got to remember you've got a hard working group of loyal staff who are picking up the pieces. And that's what I said. This is not about the LOI. This is not about day one. It's really what happens after that will determine success. And if you overheat that organization, your core business might be impacted, and certainly your deal will be impacted if you haven't got the internal resources who can make that happen.
What's interesting is you source these deals, you get the process going, and then you bring the bank in.
Yes, correct.
I don't hear that too often. Usually,
no?
The banker is the one that finds you the deals. And
well, we know. I mean, we're in a niche market. You know, we sell technology to staffing businesses. Okay, so it's a great business and it's a prospering market, and staffing businesses do an amazing job all over the world. But coming back to my point about having a 200, 250 target list, we know those companies. A lot of those companies are partners. We have an ecosystem. So we have Bullhorn Marketplace, which is similar to the App Store, the Android store, whereby a lot of our acquisitions come out of those adjacencies that we're selling through the Bullhorn Marketplace. So we know the businesses. I take probably too many calls from third parties who claim they can bring value and they can find deals that we can't find or we don't know of. That hasn't happened yet. I look forward to when it does, particularly probably when we're looking at a geo outside core geos. So US, UK, Europe, APAC are our main regions. But there's certain parts of Europe we're well penetrated, certain we're not. So if somebody came along with an amazing company that we weren't familiar with in Southern Europe, that had a good share of their revenue come from staffing technology, we'll be really interested. Yet for something unique to come in from the wings that we weren't aware of. All the deals we've done today have been self-sourced.
So do you get a break on the deal fees when you bring the banker in?
I obviously couldn't comment on our financial relationship with the bankers. But if they're doing, I believe in paying well for the job that you get done. And if somebody isn't doing an upfront job and they're not sourcing deals, you take your pick. Do you think that'll be reflected in the price or not?
Fair enough. So let's get back in-house. You're going through diligence, and obviously you're pulling people in for some parts of the analysis. And like you said, you're pacing yourself so we're not overdoing or overextending ourselves on the resources we have. What does that look like as you move through these stages? And even how do you go about knowing who to get involved in the deal?
From an internal perspective?
Yes, internal.
A lot of I'm lucky because I've got a lot of institutional knowledge. We're a 1,300 person business. So we've got 1,300 people in the business. I'm also CPO as part of my other duties. So, I know the business well. Cross-functionally, I know the business well. And that will really determine where to look. There aren't many people in our business who you could say, they could be a great VP Corp Dev let's call that for the time of their lead integration, whatever you want to call it. So, within the group of senior management, there's various people who have expressed an interest to me, who sort of come forwards and say, this is really exciting what you're doing, or that was great, I'd like to be involved in the future. But again, it's that institutional knowledge. I think I can help them understand how Corp Dev works and what makes it successful day one and a successful integration. So it's not like they have to sit with 5 miles of books and learn how to do M&A. The people around them can teach them sort of the science of M&A. It's really understanding what's best for the business. What is the thesis of the deal? Why are we doing this deal? What is the go-to-market strategy? What is the people strategy? How are we putting that together? No one better to do that than business leaders. I've worked with other models in the past, but it really does help. You could have the best corp dev person in the world who was leading the day one and the integration planning, but if they don't have that institutional knowledge, and as important, their cross-functional voice, because you're pulling lots of different functions together, whether that's sales, whether that's marketing, whether that's tech at a high level, or whether it's R&D. Those all pieces have to pull together and work in unison. So again, that person who is dealing with those people on a day one basis, who is working on the cross-functional plans leading up to the deal, are critical and probably the most important person to deal. Yes, there's someone who can get the deal done and buy the business, but again, this is the most important person because it's how that business is integrated. Now, some companies park integrations and they'll leave it for 90 days or 2 years. They may even have an earn-out where they've agreed they're not going to interfere with the business at all. Those sort of deals scare me, and I have to question why, unless you're going completely remote from what you're doing or you've just got a group of unassociated businesses. But if you are one business and you've got a headline proposition with multiple sub-propositions underneath that, and you're buying a business, get them into that as soon as possible would be my advice.
Yeah.
Because leaving them on the boundaries, there's always efficiencies in a deal. You obviously can't get efficiencies day one or day 90 unless you're willing to bring that business in and crystallize those efficiencies.
Sooner the better.
The sooner the better, absolutely.
When you bring the business leader in, are they the ones, obviously you want to get good alignment with the deal, have them bought into it, but then are they the ones that in turn would pull in some of the functional resources to start doing diligence and even preparing or thinking about integration of the company?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Their job is then to engage with the cross-functional leaders who will in turn have people in their teams that at a senior level that they delegate down to work on those cross-functional sessions. And each function has to be dealt with completely independently and then brought together at a high level. But each function will have its own metrics, its own challenges, its own opportunities of bringing this business in. Obviously, if we look at G&A, if we look at finance, if we look at HR, it's that sort of relatively business as usual. They just need to facilitate the business coming on board. They need to facilitate the process, the day one process, moving people to the new contracts if they're moving, sharing the news with people if they are being orphaned and there's no future for them in the business. They're really critical at that point. But the most important people are the functional leaders, because on day one, it's really important that if you've got an R&D function, that you've got the right person in R&D that's addressing those people and talking to those people and giving those people comfort about the future. Because all we've talked about to date is buying businesses and corp dev and all of those things. But you've got to remember in all of this, whatever you're buying, you've got people involved. You're not buying pure IP. There are people involved in this. And even if those people have a really long path and a great future within your business, it creates uncertainty in their minds.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of uncertainty as we're going through the integration process.
I was talking about, so to say, the most important thing is people in this. You can get so obsessed in the numbers and the accretive and the thesis and the analysis and numbers everywhere. And I've got an amazing CFO, or we have an amazing CFO who does an amazing job at that. And I've got very numeric board members. But we mustn't forget the people, because whatever you're buying, it involves the people. And I've seen it go badly, and people have bought what looks like a great business. And not day one, but day 90, the people that they wanted to retain haven't been retained. And a lot of that IP and that relationship and those client relationships have walked out the door. You have to question, what did they actually buy? When you look at it at 90, 180 days, and so much of that is about people. And you've got to remember, people are human. People have feelings, they have families, they have commitments. And being bought by another business is incredibly unstabilizing in what's going on in the employees' heads. So that's key to any deal, is how you embrace those people, give those people the confidence that they have a great future, hopefully a better future moving forwards. But equally put your arm around the people who aren't going to be required, whether that's in the short term or the medium term, and give them confidence, treat them as human beings, and look after those people as well. We've been, myself personally, and the rest of the SLT, we put a lot of thought and effort into how we treat people, because it's all right saying there's deal efficiencies, but behind deal efficiencies, there's often people whose lives are being impacted. So how do you treat those people with respect? How do you help those people into their next journey? And we've used outsource advice and outplacement help. We try and help them from not just adhering to their contractual commitments to those employees. Some people, particularly in the US, still shocks me being from the UK. Contractual commitments over severance is normally very, very limited. And if people are not part of the go forward vehicle, you can build into the deal costs, maybe being a little more generous to those people than they would have expected. And that creates good grace, particularly in our market. I've mentioned we're in a niche market. It's amazing how many people that haven't been required by us going forwards, they've been well looked after, they've been treated with respect, but they'll end up back in that same process with another company you're buying maybe 6 months, 12 months down the line. Because when you're fishing in that small pond of 200, 250 targets, the chances are there's people walking around between those businesses to get jobs. So we have to act with good grace and respect. And that's all equal to the founders and the sellers, because reputation is easy to destroy. Right. And it's important that, you can shake someone's hand at the end of a deal, whether they're the seller, whether it's the advisors on the other side, whether it's the people involved, look them in the eye and they'll say thank you, because you don't know where they're going to be on your next deal.
Absolutely.
It's amazing how many people crop up in our deals, whether that's advisors on the other side, legal people on the other side, or, as I said, members of the team. We've had instances where we've bought a business, we've had to sadly let go of some people, and then the business we bought 12 months later, some of those people we let go with the other business are there. But they enter into those conversations because they've been well looked after and respected in the previous conversations. They know that there's a certain level of trust there. And I keep coming back to those words, trust and relationship. To the people who are more financially astute, and for the guys that focus on the numbers, make sure you've got some people with some EQ around you, not just IQ, because it's important you understand how people are going to feel, how people are going to respond. And that applies to the deal cycle and post-deal cycle.
Treat people fairly. It all comes back to your reputation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And reputation is key.
Peter, one thing that caught my attention, you mentioned cross-functional teams. I wanted to understand that a little bit on the management side, where you have your business leader, and it sounds like they assemble a cross-functional team that then sort of delegates things to each individual function. Can you explain that a little more?
Yeah. So when I talk cross-functionally, HR, finance, IT, marketing, sales, that's what I'm talking about cross-functionally, and a whole host of technology there. So each one of those functions rolls up to somebody on the SLT. So the SLT, senior leadership team, we're very close on when we do the deals. So let's say marketing, as an example, marketing will have been involved in the deal thesis, been very much involved in the process of, are we going to buy this business? So we get that business under LOI, then the person who is responsible for marketing, our CMO, will then read in. We have quite a detailed read-in process in our business, something every business must do. People should be read in. People should be aware what being read in means. And Chinese whispers about deals shouldn't happen in a business. People either know or they don't know. So then in this instance, Gordon, our CMO, he would read in two of his key people, and those key people would meet with the lead person that's heading up the integration, and they would talk about marketing and how that fits in to the overall deal. That would then be repeated with each of the delegates from each of the functions. So SLT close, know what's going on. Then the SLT for each of the functions they're responsible for will bring someone in who'll be part of that cross-functional team. And this is a virtual cross-functional team. We don't get together in meetings with 40 different people representing all the functions. This is a divide and conquer, where your integration lead will work with each of the cross-functional representatives to come up with a plan at a functional level. Those functional level plans will be driven to the deal metrics, and then they'll be pulled together, and that will create the Bullhorn integration plan.
Well, let's get into integration. How do you determine who's going to be the integration lead?
It normally comes with, so the integration lead would normally be the best person at a level. I'm going to re-answer the question. So integration lead would be picking the right person from the business. Now, we've had a permanent VP Corp Dev historically. When that deal flow started to slow down, COVID times hit. That was a sad time where we had to say goodbye to that person. So we're in a position now where we're bringing in these integration leads on a deal-by-deal basis. And it's about their knowledge, their understanding of our business, their understanding of the target business, and who is the best person in our business to bring that together. We would always much rather take it as a development learning opportunity from a VP within our business, because it's a great learning opportunity. Someone who is leading an integration on an acquisition, it's a great learning opportunity. It's a great opportunity to get real exposure and insight into how the business runs, and real exposure and insight into working with the SLT. So that's normally a collaborative approach across the SLT, whereby SLT members will say, I've got this person in my team who'll be great at it. We may end up with 3 or 4 names that come through that process. And then as a team, we agree who we would like, who would be our preferred person to be heading up the integration. That person is then selected. Then we go and talk to that person to check that they are interested. It's something that they would want to put their life on hold for 3 to 6 months, depending on how long it takes to get the deal done. Because you know better than I, or as well as I, when you're in a deal process, it can be all consuming because there's a lot to get done. So that really helps, because you've got somebody who's fresh, somebody, yes, they need somebody to steer them through and guide them, but they've got that enthusiasm and that deal enthusiasm where they don't mind their lives being disrupted over a period of time. And that gets even worse when you're doing complex multi-geo region deals. You know, we bought businesses in the past where there has been a US, a UK, and an APAC side to the business. And that's sort of 24 hours worth of coverage on that, which means you've got to be pretty flexible when it comes to your diary and taking meetings to get the right people on the phone at the right time.
I like how you look at it, how you coined it a learning experience, almost like executive training.
It's not an MBA, but is it better than an MBA? It's real, and it's real life. And particularly if the person, the VP you're picking, is probably VP of X, but they need to then, as I said, work cross-functionally, so they need to then build up a really good understanding of how the other functions operate and how that works. And genuinely, it is a learning experience for those people. And you've got to have people who want to learn. You've got to have people who want to learn, who want to put themselves out there and take a risk, because it's high profile as well. It is a high profile role within the business when you're making an acquisition. And if you've got somebody who doesn't want to take that opportunity and sees it as a negative, they're not the right person for the job.
What's your integration process look like?
Integration process is deeply planned. We start day one planning about, well, as soon as we get under LOI, we start day one planning. And day one planning, as I said, our main plan goes all the way through. Probably 90 days is where we plan it intimately. The first thing we plan is the people. Keep coming back to that, but that's important. So there'll be a thesis, there'll be a model that's been created by the deal team, and then it's okay, how do we apply this model? How do we get to this model? So that planning starts day one, and we involve the seller in that planning as well. It's whether that's down to day one announcements, how are we going to communicate? Where are we going to communicate? Is it COVID times? Can you bring the whole company together anymore? Depending on which region it is and how it works. So that starts early doors. So when you are coming to the ends of the process, as in the buying process, you're moving towards sign and close, everyone is pretty confident that they know what's happening. They know who's got to be where, who's responsible for what. Branding. We tend to have a branding ethos whereby we bring the company on board and we have a process which takes them to a full Bullhorn product offering. But initially, it's company XYZ by Bullhorn. But that will be day one. It's important that the new employees have an email address on day one, a Bullhorn email address on day one. It's important they have access to our infrastructure on day one. If they're a Microsoft shop, we're a Google shop. How are we going to do that? How are we going to train those people? How are we going to tell people what happens next? So those first few days of planning are literally minute by minute. Who's talking to who? Where are they talking? How's that group announcement happening? Then it gets a little less micro by the minute, but the first month there's a real hiatus, the first month there's a real, there's a lot of activity that goes on. And the people who are responsible from a Bullhorn side, they've obviously got to make sure their own house is in order, their core business, because they're probably not really focusing on their core business while they're focusing on the acquisition. So there's a whole trickle-down effect. And I mentioned earlier about deal fatigue within the business. It's important that you understand as a senior executive in a business that if you are going day one or you are going integration, that this is going to have an impact on your business. And if you don't have capacity in your business to do this, seriously question why you want to do the deal. Unless you're buying a business, you're giving them a 2-year earn out, and you're saying, carry on, just report to us on a monthly basis. We've tried it always, but we do like the day one integration, as you've probably gathered by my dialogue.
So, I mean, your approach is integrate as fast as you can.
Absolutely. Because whatever the ultimate goals are, the sooner you get to those. And that's not just about efficiencies. That's about what was the strategic goal about why you were trying to buy that business. Were you bringing in products? Were you bringing in new products? If you're bringing in new products, you bring in new products so you can put it in the hands of your sales team to sell. So why do you want to wait 12, 18 months for that to happen? If you're buying something that you can add to your SKUs to sell, you want that to happen as soon as possible. Yeah. So don't waste any time. Speed is really important here because even if it's a month, 6 months, if you can accelerate things, that has a big impact, particularly in the world of private equity, whereby it's all about the multiples, and the sooner you can get to those, and the sooner they're in the rear view mirror rather than in the forward mirror. And again, you and I have talked in the past about valuations of businesses, and particularly it used to be historic EBIT and turnover that were important, but more and more it's about what a business is going to do in the future determines its ultimate valuation.
What are some of the biggest lessons learned in these past 7-8 acquisitions?
I think hopefully my dialogue will have probably brought that out. I was very strong about the people. Did we get that right in the early days? We did make some missteps, which we could go back, we'll do them again. So valuing the people. I think the one thing that we have now, and I made it sound very natural, but the relationship between legal, HR, finance, and corp dev, who sort of sit at the center of a deal, because everything else picks up from a cross-functional perspective. But those are the 4 dynamics that where the rubber meets the road on a deal. And they have...
What was that again? It was legal, HR?
I would say legal, HR, legal, HR, and finance are the 3. Did I say 4 earlier? I can't remember.
Finance. Well, corp dev was...
Yeah, sorry. And corp dev on how it pulled together. But those are sort of, in my mind, that's where the core of the activity on a deal happens. That's where the work is done to get a deal over the line. It's the combination of those 4, if you include corp dev in that, and making those relationships. And those relationships haven't always, we've learnt over time. And you've got to have, our CFO is key to our deals, and you've got to have a CFO that really cares about this and wants to be involved and knows what's happening in the deal. I think Where I see it go wrong is where Corp Dev is an island. Where Corp Dev is, right, Corp Dev by the businesses. It's a team sport. And, if we do a deal, people will congratulate me. And I'm always first say, this is not Corp Dev. Without legal, without finance, without HR, and then the support of all the cross-functional groups underneath that. So this is, we look at team sports. Olympics is coming up. So, you've got lots of sprinters, you've got lots of people who are specializing in their core events, but they all wind up into Team USA or Team UK. And that's where it becomes really important. And that's the difference between success and failure. Yes, you can be Usain Bolt and be the best sprinter in the world, but he's part of the Jamaican team and he runs in the relays and he's sort of captain of the Jamaican team and he takes responsibility for all of those. And you've got to have that mentality. And again, that comes back down to people. As you can see, people is a recurring theme, that unless you've got that team harmony, and you've seen I'm sure you run shows and programs on what happens when a deal goes wrong and people talking about deals going wrong. And if you have got those four groups, Corp Dev, HR, finance, and legal working together, you're minimizing. This is everything that we do is based on micro improvements, getting those extra bits right. How can you add value to deal? How can you make sure it doesn't go astray? How can you minimize your deal costs? How can you maximize your EBIT at the other end? And unless you've got this complete team ethos of people working together and seeing team success, you will drop balls. You might not fail, but it might cost you 3 or 4 points at the other end. And those 3 or 4 points at the other end can be worth tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars when you come to look at your exit, when you come to work out why you've done the thing. And again, know why you're doing the deal. So I know I've gone back to the start, but you've got to know why you do it. You can't just be doing a deal because your private equity company or your VC house says you need to start some acquisitions. You've got to know why you're doing it and what's the impact going to be, and not just spreadsheets, not just numbers.
I like it. People focus, the team, and the why.
Yeah.
Peter, what's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
I've had some crazy relationships in buying businesses, some which would probably be inappropriate to talk about, but some people do stupid things under pressure, and that results in really strange behavior. People get aggressive in a heartbeat. People go from placid, nice conversation like you are having now, and when it becomes personal, when they become nervous, or when they think the deal might not happen, or everyone always thinks there's somebody with hidden agendas in a deal. And that can evoke some very audacious, aggressive behavior. I'm fortunate. I'm relatively calm. And I haven't had any situations I can't deal with. But people's behavior in a deal is one. And the other thing you see is the prices that people have paid for businesses, which, you now look at failed and you now see them 3-4 years on. And when you speak to the people involved, how did that go? Yeah, it didn't really work out. And you think, that's no great surprise. We looked at a company once, we were looking at valuing 5 million tops. And it wasn't, we tend to look at a threshold of size in terms of when something becomes attractive to us. We look at 5, we may have been able to stretch an argument to 10 if it was a majorly strategic thing for us. It wasn't. They ended up trading at nearly 40 million in the same period of time. The company bought them completely overpaid for them. And they should no way have paid that amount of money. Now, as a seller, happy, give me your money. But if they look at their outcomes now on that deal, I doubt they can actually have anything that points to it was successful in any way of their initial deal target. So I think if you ask me one question, it would be paying a very large amount of money for a business that had no real worth. And they got caught in the thrill of the chase. And exactly as I said, they were told they had to do a deal. We've got to do deals. And they sort of rounded on something that was a bright, shiny object, but had no real value underneath it.
Wow. Overpaying and blowing up.
Yep. Couldn't really get much worse. So what have you seen? You must have more stories than I've got. I've got a very close view on
Craziest stories.
What's the craziest story you've seen?
Oh, I've seen. We did a happy hour one time that was just about crazy stories and people drinking on it. So I mean, there was stuff where people are doing diligence and finding out like the organization was funding terrorism. Like, there's some really interesting stuff that came out.
Touch wood. Haven't seen that one. I think you always see, particularly if you're doing a founder-led purchase or you're buying a founder-led business, you often see what would classified as as personal bills coming into the business, whether that's house cleaning, car valeting. A lot of, particularly if somebody's evolved a business from a small business, the difference between a personal bank account and a business bank account didn't exist. And as it's grown, that sort of never stopped. So, you definitely see some interesting incidents of, let's call them, there wouldn't be recurring costs when the deal is signed, because they'll have to go back being paid from somebody's personal bank account rather than the business bank account.
I'm trying to remember what city, maybe it was DC. I met a guy at a bar who his whole career was being essentially the CFO of U.S. embassies in various countries. And that was interesting when he had stories of what was getting expensed and, some interesting things, because it's all different cultures, different ways of doing business. And remember, I think one was he had somebody expense 2 goats in the Middle East because that was a customary thing to go up to a meeting with some goats.
Yeah, but under the Bribery and Corruptions Act, that would definitely not be permissible anymore, whether it's goats or goat's milk.
Yeah.
But I mean, culturally, that's where, culturally there is difference. We haven't spoken about it here, but there is definitely a cultural difference between buying a business in the US, buying a business in the UK, buying a business in mainland Europe. And then when you've got Europe, huge cultural differences between all the countries in Europe, and then down in APAC. So you've got to know your audience, and you've got to speak the language your audience speaks, because say buying a business in the US is not the same as buying a business in the Netherlands. And yes, there is a formal process, but there's so many differences between the two.
That's a whole interview we could pick up.
Absolutely.
Actually, it'd be a fun roundtable. Just sort of.
On international deal nuances. Yeah, absolutely, it would. Definitely.
Awesome. Peter, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
It's a real pleasure. Looking forward to seeing the podcast and talking to you again in the future.
Absolutely. Here's to the deal.